Now to our first speaker and to give a proper introduction to Dr. David Miller. I'm proud to call David a friend and a colleague. We've published and written on propaganda topics for many years. And as I mentioned before, David has had a particular experience at the University of Bristol battling the Israel lobby, which led ultimately to his firing. And as some of you will know, he has just been very successful in an industrial tribunal where it has been found that the University of Bristol were wrong to dismiss David. And he's going to talk us through this experience and I think provide some very powerful insights into just how coercive efforts can become in order to silence academics. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Piers. I've got 25 minutes, and I suppose what is probably best to do is to discuss what happened to me and then draw some thoughts from that about how academia is being increasingly constrained, and secondly, what we ought to do to fight back, not just in terms of academia, but in terms of the whole wider question of fighting back against specifically Zionist attempts to shut down debate, but also more widely against the culture of censorship and unfreedom which we currently find ourselves involved with. I started at the University of Bristol in September 2018. Piers, for whom I should say thank you for the introduction, of course, had been previously at the University of Bristol. And I know that there are a number of people who have had experience at the University of Bristol, which has not always been the same. The experience I had was that within a matter of weeks of arriving in September, I think within 5 weeks of arriving, I gave a talk at a closed student meeting for Palestinian students, a Palestinian organization called Olive, on Beating the Campus Bullies, I believe was the title. And at that talk, I tried to give some advice about how to fight the then newly being introduced International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, which, as everyone knows, who's looked at this, is a Zionist working definition of anti-Semitism, which, of course, tries to blur together anti-Semitism, i.e., prejudice or racism against the Jews, with criticism of Israel. And as many people have noted, most of the examples appended to this very short and frankly very vague definition of anti-Semitism are examples which deal with Israel. And in particular, one of the examples which I mentioned and discussed in that talk was an example where they talk about so referring to the state of Israel as a racist endeavor as being one of the examples which could, in context, be regarded as being anti-Semitic. And I said, look, this is not anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Semitic to say Israel is and always has been a racist endeavor. And I think I said words to the effect of, I'm saying this in full consciousness that many people would say that that's anti-Semitic. But of course, it's not anti-Semitic to say that the Zionists created a state in a land where there was already an indigenous population at the expense of that indigenous population, both in terms of them being killed and, of course, 750,000 or more Palestinians being expelled in 1948. Now, this is well documented, well known, and of course, that's the basis on which anyone says that Zionism, the state of Israel, is a racist ideology, is a racist endeavor, because it is, it always has been. So I made these comments, and very soon thereafter, there was a report in Harry's Place, which is an Islamophobic Zionist blog, which was set up in 2002 or 2003 in order to support the invasion of Iraq. And they had sent someone along to the meeting to record the meeting, covertly record the meeting. It's a very small meeting. I mean, I think there was only maybe less than 20 people in the audience. And so one of those people was a spy. And that was an indication that being at Bristol was bringing with it more attention from the Zionist movement than I had previously had. I have been attacked prior to that by the Zionist movement, going back to, I don't know, 2010 or 11 or 12. But this was a new departure, that they would send a spy along to covertly record my words and then try and have me sacked or removed from the Labour Party, of which I was then member. If you recall, late 2018, Jeremy Corbyn was still the leader of the party. And they tried to do this, and of course they manifestly failed. The Labour Party didn't expel me for making such an obviously sensible comment, which of course had been in the end based on something which even John McDonnell had been able to say somewhat previously about the IHRA. So that was an indication that there was an effort to undermine my position at the university, and indeed more broadly in the Labour Party and in public debate. And then some weeks after that, I must be about 2 months, just over 2 months, in February 2019, I gave a lecture in my course, which the course was called Harms of the Powerful, criminology course, a course which I was given to teach when I arrived at the University of Bristol. First course I'd taught since I got there, actually, and we were, I don't know, in week 3 or something of the semester, and I did a lecture on Islamophobia, looking at the way in which Islamophobia is created and spread in society, and rehearsing some of the things I've written about it, in particular the idea that there are 5 pillars of Islamophobia. The first one, and the backbone of Islamophobia, in my contention, is the state and the counter-terrorism apparatus, which of course is on a daily basis harassing Muslims at ports, on the streets, and in other ways. But that, in addition to the backbone being the state, the counter-terrorism apparatus, the intelligence services, etc., there are 4 other social movements who push the boundaries of Islamophobia in society, one of which I had maintained was parts of the Zionist movement. And some students, 2 students to be precise, in the class took objection to that small part of the lecture. And they complained to an Israel lobby group, the Community Security Trust. And they complained, the Community Security Trust, on behalf of the students to the university. And the university quite properly rejected the complaint and didn't accept it as a complaint because, of course, an Israel lobby group is not a student and cannot complain on behalf of students. Students have to complain themselves. The students didn't want to complain, even though they were offered anonymity by the university, which I think at the time was contrary to the policies of the university. But anyhow, they were offered this and they didn't want to complain. So the Israel lobby group approached another Israel lobby group, the Union of Jewish Students in London, to take a complaint. They thought that because they were students, the Union of Jewish Students, they would be able to take the complaint. And of course, in order to make that even more likely to be accepted, because of course it's only Bristol University students who can complain about Bristol University staff, they roped in the president of the Bristol Jewish Society, which is a Zionist student organization, which is part of the Union of Jewish Students, which of course is part of the World Union of Jewish Students and part of the World Zionist Organization, as I have said on many, many occasions. And as a result of it being signed by this person, the president of the Bristol Jewish Society, it was accepted as a legitimate complaint. But the complaint was problematic in the sense that the complaint was the contents of the complaint included several statements that I had made in 2013 and 14 and 15, before, many years before I had been working at the University of Bristol, and therefore none of those parts of the complaints should have been accepted, because the university had a rule that complaints must be made within a short time of the incidents happening. So the student concerned had not been my student, had never spoken, as we later discovered, to anyone who'd ever been my student or who'd ever attended any class that I'd ever given. And she was able to make this complaint, and it was accepted, which it shouldn't have been. But nevertheless, I was found that I hadn't done or said anything which was anti-Semitic, and I was found cleared by the internal procedure at the University of Bristol. This is in June 2019, and you can see this is a long story, and I'm going to give you the fast version from now on. And so what happened then was that the student appealed and said that they wanted, but they complained that the complaint hadn't been judged under the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition, which the University of Bristol did not at that stage have as part of its, it hadn't accepted that definition. The university then unilaterally said to the student, well, we're thinking about introducing it, so do you want to pause your complaint while we change the rules, when we think about changing the rules? And if we do change the rules, then you can reactivate your complaint then. And of course, the student said, yeah, I'll do that, thanks. And of course, 6 months later, they changed the rules after having a decision that they were not going to change the rules, and then being lobbied by the Bristol Jewish Society with the complainant, who was the president, as part of the lobby. And they changed the rules, and they then resurrected the complaint and considered the complaint, which in any case was almost entirely out of time, under the new rules of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. The only part of the complaint which was not out of time was a complaint which this student made about an essay topic which I had given in this class in The Harms of the Powerful. And the essay topic was on corporate lobbying. And it asked about whether corporate lobbying was a form of corporate harm, which of course has got nothing at all to do with Israel, with Zionism, or indeed with the Jews. But she said that it could possibly be an invitation to talk about Jewish power, which of course was entirely rubbish. And what happened then was that the university appointed a QC, an external QC, who took about a year to do an investigation, and eventually she concluded that I didn't have any case to answer at all on anything, and that in particular, the one part of the complaint which had been within time, this thing about the essay question, was, she said, and I'm quoting, manifestly hopeless. And it was manifestly hopeless, ridiculous complaint. But she cleared me on all charges. And this is the end of December. This is the end in December 2020 that happened. And I should also mention, since we're going to talk about Syria later, that the university, in doing the investigation, took the opportunity to add several other charges into the investigation, which were not to do with Zionism or Israel or anything, or anti-Semitism, but to do with Syria. And partly they came from harassment of the university by a Times journalist, Dominic Kennedy, who had asked questions about whether it was possible that I had been receiving Russian money as part of the work which I'd been doing with peers and colleagues with the Syria Media Propaganda Working Group. And of course, these questions were ridiculous, but nevertheless, they wanted to have those added to the complaint as well, and they were added, and then, of course, roundly dismissed by the QC. And then we had a 6-week period where I was cleared, and then in the middle of February 2021, I went on a public meeting on a Saturday outside of work and said, oh, look, as some of you will know, I've been attacked and complained about by these people, by the president of the JSOC and president of the Union of Jewish Students. And then all hell broke loose. There was a massive campaign to have me dismissed. More than 100 members of the Houses of Lords and Commons wrote to me to be dismissed. Some university funding agencies wrote asking for me to be dismissed. Zionist professors in my university did the same. Zionist professors outside the university did the same. And as everyone now knows, I was sacked on the 1st of October 2021. And then eventually, after an appeal was rejected by the university, I took the university to court with a tribunal starting on the 16th of October last year. And I can talk to you at length about that if you want to ask me about it later. But essentially what happened as a result of that was that I was found to have been wrongly dismissed, that the university had not properly investigated the complaint against me. They had displayed a partiality, had not properly examined the evidence, had breached their own guidelines on how things should be investigated. They hadn't properly evaluated how they should use the investigation and how they should set the allegations in the investigation against my existing rights under in relation to freedom of expression and in relation to academic freedom, and therefore that I'd been wrongly dismissed. But they also found, the university claimed that I was dismissed because, not because I was anti-Semitic, because I was found on both occasions, actually 3 occasions, once by the university and twice by QC, to be not anti-Semitic in anything I'd ever said. But the university decided that because my anti-Zionist comments had upset some students and they had said that they felt unsafe as a result of me expressing anti-Zionist views, that they should sack me. But at the tribunal, what happened was that the university's own witnesses conceded that really it wasn't the comments on the students which was the reason that I'd been dismissed, but the real reason was because I had anti-Zionist views which were so outlandish, according to them, that they had to dismiss me. And of course, the court decided that this was ridiculous and that my views, my anti-Zionist views, were not outlandish, and in fact were, to use the language in the Act, worthy of respect in a democratic society. This is the Equality Act 2010. And that actually the reason I'd been dismissed was because of my anti-Zionist views. And furthermore, that anti-Zionist views constituted a philosophical belief which should be protected as a philosophical belief under the Equality Act. So we established the principle that no one can be sacked now for anti-Zionist views. And that's the most important element of the outcome of the case. What that means, of course, is that the Zionist attempt to blur together anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism in what they call the new anti-Semitism has been significantly challenged at a legal level. It's now regarded in the law that anti-Zionist views are, on the contrary, not racist, but actually worthy of respect in a democratic society. And that's the most important element of the case. Right. So without going into what happened in the tribunal, you can read the judgment, but I can tell you much more about that later should you ask about it. I wanted to go on to talk about the state of play and how to fight back against that. So in relation to Zionism, my tribunal was started on the 16th of October, which is, as everyone recalls, 9 days after the launch of Al-Aqsa Flood, the Palestinian resistance operation, which broke out of Gaza, took over several military bases, killed a large number of Israel Defense Forces personnel, and shocked the Israeli military establishment. And of course, that's led to the response from the Zionists, which has been, of course, bloodlust and genocide, as those of us who've been talking about Zionism for many years were not surprised about. But as everyone now sees in the world, the Zionists are genocidal, fundamentally racist ideology, which cannot help but express its genocidal consciousness in action, in as we've seen in Gaza with the thousands and thousands and thousands of dead. So the result of this is that it's becoming possible to fight back against Zionism, but only if one adopts a particular approach. So I would say that if your approach to being accused of anti-Semitism when you're talking up for the Palestinians is to say, "Oh, I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to upset. I didn't realize that you would find that offensive. Of course, I didn't mean to offend you. I'm not myself anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish in any way, but I understand that you might have been offended, and I'm happy to come and talk to you to understand better about how I've offended you, etc." That approach is an approach which is dedicated and destined to lose, and to make sure that you are removed as a useful critic of Zionism and a useful ally of the Palestinians. The approach that I've taken throughout this process is to say, look, Zionism is racism. Zionism is a genocidal ideology. There is no prospect of having a meaningful, good faith dialogue with Zionists. They simply have to be the ideology simply has to be defeated. And that the way to do that, of course, is to engage in the kinds of processes which were envisaged by the Allies at the end of the Second World War, or the Great Patriotic War, as it's called, in Russia. And that, of course, is the process of denazification. So we face the possibility, as Zionism is under pressure now, although, of course, it's had many victories, that we can move towards a policy and a process of de-Zionization, which means that we de-Zionize occupied Palestine. First of all, we dismantle the Jewish state, and we have a Palestinian state of all its people. But we also need not just to arraign the war criminals, the Netanyahus, the Gallants, the Herzogs, the Ben Gvirs, the Smotriches, not just them. We don't just arraign them like von Ribbentrop and Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe. We also have to de-Zionize the society because, of course, millions and millions of Israeli citizens have joined the so-called Israeli Defense Forces, and they have to be targeted and tackled so that they can find a way to live in harmony with the Palestinians in the future. So that I think is the challenge of taking on this battle in relation to academic freedom in relation to Zionism. It's a bigger challenge than just the question of academic freedom, it seems to me. Although, of course, there are some ways in which it's a similar kind of approach to other topics where there's an attempt to suppress the attempt to do empirical academic research. Of course, as I mentioned already, worked with peers on the question of Syria, and the Syrian question remains a running sore in popular debate. And it's really extraordinary that that's the case. But nevertheless, the sheer amount of propaganda effort that was put into trying to convince people that this was a noble revolution, and that the bad people in this conflict were the Syrian government, the Iranians, the Russians, as opposed to the people who were actually prosecuting the war, which was, of course, NATO and NATO allies and their proxies in Syria. So I think there are lessons that one can learn which apply to a number of different areas. But in relation to Zionism, I think we're in a particular phase of history where the Zionists look very, very weak. And although it might seem that they're powerful in the sheer amount of death and destruction they're causing in the genocide, I believe that the reason for that is their structural weakness. So I would sort of conclude all of this by saying, look, the reason that we need to support freedom of speech, and I wouldn't say that I was a freedom of speech absolutist, but the reason that we need to support freedom of speech is that we can't have proper political dialogue without it. But I think there's a more important reason for defending academic freedom, which is that you cannot know how the world operates without academic freedom. There cannot be any science without academic freedom. And that's one of the things that I say a fair amount is like, what was I supposed to do when I did this research on Zionism? And I've done research for many years now on Zionism, and I found out these things about what Zionism is, or what I think Zionism is, or what I was able to show. What should I do when people complain about that, who said they were offended? Should I say, well, I'm sorry, I did this research and this is what I found, but I'll now shut up because you don't like the findings? It doesn't change the findings. You can't change the science by simply pressuring and trying to censor academics from doing research. The way to challenge the research which I've done is to challenge it head on in a good faith way by saying that it's wrong and showing that it's wrong, as opposed to simply trying to destroy the careers and livelihoods of the people who conduct research, which is antithetical to your perceived interests. So that's what I would say about this: is that we really have to have the ability to speak freely and to research and think and communicate freely, or you don't have the possibility of understanding how the world operates and changing the world for the better. So that's what I would say. Thank you for having me on this symposium, and I'm happy to take questions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for that incredible story and experience that you've been through. I'll just say briefly before we move on to our next speaker, as somebody who was at the University of Bristol and familiar with some of the people who were lining up to engage you. I mean, it was quite tragic to watch for me. I did think in all of this, the kind of courage of your convictions and staying with this issue and so on, it seems now we're at a point in time where you are being powerfully vindicated by what we are seeing in Gaza and in the Middle East. So, if there's a kind of a lesson there for people to stick to your guns, you do get vindicated in the long run, that speaking truth to power and so on, although it's a painful process, and for you, acutely painful process, it is worth doing. You get there in the end. Thank you, David. I'm sure we'll come back to discuss some of these issues when we get to the panel discussion at the end.